48 hours. That was how long Keisha Monroe and her 3 children had been living in their car in a Walmart parking lot in Raleigh, North Carolina, in January, when the temperature dropped to 19 degrees, before a neighbor she had never spoken to knocked on the driver's side window and handed her a key. Steve Harvey learned this on the Family Feud stage on a Thursday afternoon in October, 9 months later, and he placed both hands on the podium, lowered his head, and stood that way for 11 full seconds while 300 people held their breath. Then he raised his head, looked at Keisha, and said 4 words: "Stand up. Right now, stand." What happened after Keisha Monroe stood up would be seen by 274 million people, force a state housing authority to publicly revise its emergency placement protocol, and bring a landlord named Gerald Fitch to a reckoning he had spent 30 years avoiding. The studio was running warm that Thursday afternoon. October in Atlanta is still summer if the sun hits the building right. Keisha Monroe walked backstage before the taping with one hand on her daughter Brianna's shoulder. Brianna was 9 and was wearing a red bow in her hair that she had put in herself that morning. She had been practicing Family Feud questions in the car for the entire drive from Raleigh. When the stage coordinator told them they had 8 minutes before walk-on, Brianna looked up at her mother and said, "Mama, are you nervous?" Keisha said, "A little." Brianna said, "Don't be. We already won harder stuff than this." Keisha looked at her daughter for a long moment. She did not cry. She pressed her lips together and nodded and said, "You're right, baby." The Monroes walked out onto the stage. Keisha, Brianna, Keisha's sister Rhonda, Rhonda's husband Calvin, and Keisha's 17-year-old son Darius, who had the quiet composure of a boy who had learned to be the man of the house before he was ready. Keisha laughed at Steve's jokes. She was good at that. Laughing at the right moments, keeping her face easy, performing okayness. She had been doing it for 9 months. Nobody in that studio knew what was underneath it. But nobody in that studio knew what she'd done with her $312 either, and that wasn't even the part that would make Steve cry. The number was $312. That was what Keisha Monroe had in her bank account on January 14th, when the eviction notice appeared on the door of the apartment she had rented from Gerald Fitch for 4 years and 2 months at a low $140 a month, never once late. She had documented every payment. She kept the receipts in a folder she still had. The eviction notice cited lease violations. Keisha asked Gerald Fitch in writing to specify the violations. He responded in writing 11 days later with a list of 3 items: a noise complaint from a neighbor, a pet clause violation, and what Fitch described as unauthorized structural modification, which referred to a removable closet organizer Keisha had installed with adhesive strips. No holes, no damage, adhesive strips. She contacted Legal Aid of North Carolina. The intake coordinator told her their earliest available appointment was 6 weeks out. She filed the paperwork. She attended every required step of the eviction hearing process. She argued her own case, clearly and specifically, with her receipts and her written correspondence and her documentation of 4 years of on-time payment. The magistrate reviewed the filings. He ruled in favor of Gerald Fitch on the grounds that the lease agreement contained a broad landlord discretion clause that Keisha had not challenged at signing. The eviction was legal. The magistrate expressed no opinion on whether it was right. She had 14 days to vacate. The temperature on the morning she loaded her car was 11 degrees. Brianna was 7 at the time. Her sons, Darius and Marcus, 15 and 8, helped carry boxes. She had sorted their belongings into what fit in the car and what didn't. The things that didn't fit she left in garbage bags on the curb, because the storage unit she had called about had a 2-week waiting list for ground floor access, and she couldn't carry heavy boxes upstairs alone. She left a lamp her mother had given her. She left a bookshelf Darius had built in shop class. She drove to the Walmart parking lot because it was lit, because there was a bathroom inside, and because she had Googled safest place to park overnight with children, and it came up. She told Brianna they were having an adventure. Brianna was 7 and believed her. Darius did not believe her. Darius was 15 and had watched his mother sort their life into what would fit and what wouldn't. And he had said nothing, because he understood at 15 that there are moments when the most useful thing you can do is carry a box without comment. He carried every box without comment. He sat in the back seat of the car that first night with his 8-year-old brother Marcus asleep against his shoulder, and stared out the window at the parking lot lights, and held everything he was feeling in the controlled, careful way that black teenage boys in America learn to hold things, because the alternative is too expensive. On the second night, a knock on the driver's side window. A woman named Patricia Simmons, 61 years old, who lived 3 streets from the Walmart and walked past the parking lot every evening with her dog. She had seen the car the night before. She had gone home. She had come back. She knocked on the window and held up a key. She said, through the glass, "I have a basement room. It's not much, but it's warm and it's private, and it's yours until you find something." Keisha stared at her for a moment. Patricia said, "I'm not asking for anything. Please." Keisha Monroe took the key. She stayed in Patricia Simmons's basement for 11 weeks. She found an apartment through a faith-based housing advocacy nonprofit and moved in on March 29th, a date she could tell you without looking at a calendar because some dates are permanent. She got a second job, morning shifts at a bakery before her daytime administrative position, and worked both for 7 months to cover first and last month's rent and rebuild her savings. She lost 11 pounds in those 7 months. She developed a habit of checking the door lock twice before she went to sleep. She never told the children how close it had been. She told Brianna they had found a nicer place. She told Marcus that Patricia's basement had been a special sleepover. She told Darius, because Darius was 15 and already knew, "We made it." Darius said, "Yeah, Ma, we did." He didn't say anything else. He went to his room and did his homework and got straight A's that semester. Keisha found this out at his parent-teacher conference and sat in the plastic chair across from his history teacher and pressed her lips together until she could speak without her voice breaking. She had applied to Family Feud in April, 6 weeks after moving into the new apartment. She applied because Brianna had watched an episode and said, "Mama, we should go on that show. We'd be really good." She applied because Darius had laughed when Brianna said it. A real laugh. The first one she had heard from him in 3 months. She applied because she needed, just once, to take her children somewhere that felt like a prize. Steve would later call what he felt on that stage the closest thing to holy he had experienced on television. The game was 1 round in when Steve paused between questions, looked at Keisha Monroe and said, "The way he does when something in a person's face is telling him more than they are. Keisha, what are you carrying today?" She looked at him. The studio went quiet in a way it hadn't all episode. She said, "A lot, Steve." He said, "Tell me." She said, 14 months ago I was evicted in January for a closet organizer. My kids and I lived in my car for 2 nights in 19-degree weather until a stranger gave us her key." She stopped. "I came here today because my daughter said we'd be good at this." She looked down at Brianna. She was right. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey stepped back from the podium. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. He turned away for a moment, then turned back. He said, "We're going to stop the game. No network. No producers. Just me, Steve Harvey, and this family right here, right now. A producer stepped forward. Steve held up his hand. He looked at Keisha. He looked at Darius, this 17-year-old who was standing at the podium the way boys stand when they have been the man of the house since 15. Steve walked toward him. He said, "Young man, what did you do the night you lived in that parking lot?" Darius said, "I kept my brother from being scared." Steve's jaw tightened. He said, to the audience, to the cameras, to everyone, "Let me tell you something. I made a promise. I promised God that if he ever got me out of my car, I would spend the rest of my life helping people who were in theirs. This family is why I made that promise." Because Darius Monroe did not fall apart in a parking lot. He held his little brother and kept him from being scared. 15 years old. He stopped. He looked at Keisha directly. "You raised that." He said, low and steady, "Stand up. Right now." Stand. Keisha Monroe stood up straight. He wasn't done. Steve pulled out his phone and called his business manager live on the Family Feud stage. He asked for two things: a 1-year lease on a 3-bedroom apartment in Raleigh to be signed in Keisha Monroe's name, fully covered by the Harvey Foundation, and an introduction to the North Carolina Housing Advocacy Coalition director to discuss the case of Gerald Fitch and the legal loophole that had made a closet organizer grounds for winter eviction. "Both," he said today. He turned to both families, the Monroes and the competing family, the Greens from Atlanta, and announced they were both walking out with the full $20,000 prize. The Greens crossed the stage before Steve finished the sentence. The Green family's grandmother, a woman named Dot, who was 78, walked directly to Brianna and crouched down and said, "Baby, you are something special." Brianna said, "Thank you. So are you." The audience made a sound that wasn't quite applause. It was something older than applause. The episode aired 6 weeks later. It had 71 million views in the first 36 hours. Within 3 weeks, it crossed 274 million. The hashtag #SheKeptTheKey trended for 10 days in 21 countries. Gerald Fitch's real estate license was placed under review by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission within 30 days of the episode airing. The commission found 3 additional eviction patterns across Fitch's properties over 11 years involving documented discrepancies between stated violations and tenant records. His license was suspended 8 months later, pending a full hearing. 3 months after the taping, the North Carolina Housing Authority revised its emergency placement protocol to include a 72-hour hold on winter evictions, pending a third-party review. A direct legislative response that the bill's sponsor named the Keisha Clause in the committee hearing. Patricia Simmons was invited to testify. She said, "I just knocked on a window." Anybody would have done it. Nobody in the hearing room agreed with that last part. A year after the taping, Darius Monroe received a full academic scholarship to North Carolina State University. He studied urban planning. In his application essay, he wrote about the night in the parking lot and about what it means to know which things you can control when everything else is out of control. The admissions officer who read the essay later said in an interview that she had set it down twice because she needed to collect herself. Today, the Winter Door Project, named for the night Patricia Simmons knocked, operates in 8 cities across the Carolinas and Virginia. It trains community volunteers to identify families in vehicles or other precarious overnight situations during cold weather months, and provides immediate warm shelter placement and legal advocacy. Its motto, taken from what Keisha said backstage to Steve after the taping when he asked her what she wanted people to take from her story, is, "All I needed was one door to stay open." The project has served 1,340 families to date and has a 24-hour volunteer response network in every city it operates. Steve spoke about Keisha in an interview the following spring. He said, "I've seen a lot of courage on that stage. But the courage that moves me is the kind nobody sees." Keisha Monroe looked at her children every morning in that parking lot and made it okay. She held it all where they couldn't see it. That's not just a mother. That is a monument. 2 years after the taping, Keisha received a handwritten card from Patricia Simmons. It said, "I heard about everything you've built. I want you to know I wasn't brave that night. I was just cold thinking about those babies in that car. You're the brave one. You always were." Keisha read it at her kitchen table in the 3-bedroom apartment, with Brianna doing homework across from her and the door lock clicked shut behind them both. And warm. In a parking lot in January, 19 degrees, a mother told her daughter they were having an adventure. Her daughter believed her, and from that parking lot and that lie told out of love, and that stranger's key, and that closet organizer, and those 48 hours of cold, something was built that is still standing, still open, still letting people through the door. Have you ever stayed when someone expected you to break? Have you ever been the person who knocked on the window? Share your story in the comments. If Keisha's story moved you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to know that the door that stays open is always worth more than the one that shuts. Your worth is not determined by a landlord's lease clause, and it never was.